Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Awesemo.com strategy show for the NFL for the Saturday slate. Bit of a change up this week. We've got some Saturday games. We had 2 last week. We got 3 on the slate this week. Different kind of a week for the NFL. A lot of action spread all over the place, but Saturday we should have a nice, fun slate of games on tap. I've got Kyle Dvorchak here with me. We're here to break down everything across the entire slate for those 3 games. Really get into help you guys win some GPP money. Kyle, how you doing, buddy?
Not bad. I'm actually seeing if I can get the top stack tool for this game in my DMs from Alex right now. So hopefully we can give a little exclusive information because we usually have top stacks for the main slate. You know, not a ton of games on this slate, but if I can get that, give the viewers or listeners, if you're listening to this after it comes out, a little bit of insider info, I think that'd be cool. So I'll see if I can get him to send it to me.
Right on. Yeah, I saw that you popped that into our Slack before the show. That was a really good idea. That's an invaluable tool. If you guys out there aren't using it, just for building lineups, get in there. It shows you Alex's breakdown of what the most likely team to be the top stack of the week, the top scoring stack is, and then each team by quarterback ownership so that you can figure out where the leverage on those different stacks is. Fantastic tool. I use it constantly when I'm building lineups, when I put my groups together for my groups article. So I think it's just invaluable. Kyle, I made a note. You're pulling double duty today. I tried to catch your Twitter when Lofty said it this morning, but I think it's Kyle Tweets here. Is that right?
That would be correct.
All right, everybody get out there and follow Kyle on Twitter. That's his handle. I'm at DigitalB21 if anybody wants to follow me. I blast my weekly articles out on there and then don't say very much otherwise. Maybe a retweet here and there for these guys. So, Kyle, I figure best way to go through everything now. Before we get into that, guys, make sure you hit the like out there for us, the little thumbs up down there, and subscribe both here on YouTube and everywhere you listen to podcasts. We're putting all the different shows out, as everything except for the Live Before Locks out as podcasts. So those are available on all your favorite podcast channels. So get out there and subscribe for us. Helps us out a lot. Kyle, I figured best way to get into this, we've only got 3 games to talk about, kind of a lot of time. So just figure maybe we go game by game, kind of just break down the slate from that perspective and just see what we got. And since everything's kind of staggered through the day with one game going off at a time, makes it pretty easy and makes sense to go that route. So first game we've got on tap, Tampa Bay at Detroit. We've got Tampa coming in with a 9.5 point as the 9.5 point favorite, 53 point total, highest total on the board for the day is the first game. And we've got 31.5 point implied total for Tampa, 21.5 for Detroit. Tampa's the biggest favorite on the board, most likely team to score a lot of points, but it's a spot where, maybe the game script gets away after they score a little bit and they just start socking it away, running the ball and, playing some defense. This Detroit team, just atrocious defensively. Tampa, very solid defensive squad. So, we know what we're getting into there. What do you like from just kind of before we get into positions and players? What do you like just as far as a 50,000-foot view of this game? Any thoughts?
I mean, like you said, this total makes it look like, almost the game of the week. There are a few other games on the entire week as a whole, let alone this tiny little slate with as high of a total. I believe it and depending on where you look, basically it and Kansas City are tied for second outside of that. Was that the Christmas Green Bay game? When is that? I don't know. So I think this is the obvious. It's so hard to remember all this scheduling stuff. Maybe that's the primetime game on Sunday. God, I don't know. There's too many games this week, especially the way they spread them out.
Coming back and everything. It's just my brain is just mush at this point. So I had these 3 games as a focus, and I have no idea what else is going on.
Yeah. So, but on the week, you would argue this is one of the best games, let alone when you narrow down your scope to what we're doing on this tiny slate. And I think the most interesting thing is that because on the Tampa Bay side, we have 3 receivers that are going to be difficult to parse through who you want to play and a tight end, maybe even a backup tight end, honestly. And then I honestly don't know why on the Detroit side, we're not seeing as much ownership as I think we should be. This looks like it's just going to be relatively modest ownership compared to it being the obvious spot. So I think there are a lot of across positions, places to attack this game that I just don't think are going to be as owned as they should be, frankly.
Yeah, it seems like even though it's going to be, a somewhat popular spot and it's one of the more appealing targets on the game, I do agree with you. I think there is places where we can kind of tuck in and find some value, some lower owned plays that make sense and do have the upside to break through on this slate. So definitely a good spot to look at. Just getting into things here, I mentioned the defense there. On the injury front, we've got Ronald Jones unlikely to play for Tampa. That tees up, good spot for Lenny Fournette. Looks like he's going to be pretty popular. He was coming up a ton for me when I crunched some lineups. On the Detroit side, we've got Stafford is banged up. Says he's going to tough it out. They say they're not going to shut him down for the season. We saw him come out after the game got away the last time Chase Daniel came in, but says he's going to go. He's going to be without Kenny Golladay again. Their O-line is banged up. Just seems like a terrible spot to even risk him, but he wants to be out there. So, yeah. Any other key injuries or anything like that? And any thoughts on what those injuries might do as far as distribution of targets and touches?
Yeah, I think he wrapped up all the injuries we have. And I mean, I agree. I'm on the same side as you that logically it makes no sense for Julio Jones, any of the Chargers, Matthew Stafford. These guys are all playing on teams that were done 3 weeks ago. None of them should be playing. But I mean, football players are just, MF and warriors. And even if they have broken ribs and torn cartilage and ligaments falling out of their brains, like they're probably going to play. So assuming Stafford does end up playing, yeah, like I think he'll be a good play. Sure, you run the risk that maybe he comes out in the fourth quarter, but like he probably had to play poorly to put them in a position where they are for sure not going to win in the fourth quarter. So I think even then that's probably an overblown risk. Like if they're losing 17-35 in the final minutes, those final minutes weren't going to save your terrible Stafford lineup anyway. So I wouldn't really worry about that. Even though it is a possibility, you probably already lost by then.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. He's going to have that game, or in that situation, he would be so far behind points wise that it wouldn't even matter to you. So yeah, there's no real point in worrying about that. And Stafford's a guy, despite the way the year's gone for the Lions, he's a guy I don't mind getting to. And I think there are some workable pieces in this passing game. I think Hawkinson's kind of interesting on the tight end side. We can get into him a little bit. And then, of course, Marvin's sitting there, Marvin Jones. So I like getting to him. He's a guy who flashes that big game upside from time to time for us, a couple times a year. It gets a little thin after that, but they've got DeAndre Swift in there at the running back as well. And then, ageless Adrian Peterson. So what do we want to do? Do you want to get into any of the Detroit running game at all, or is it more about the passing game on the Detroit side of things?
Honestly, I hate to jump the gun here, but all of Detroit, frankly, is like, we have 2 more games to talk about, but I think this is where I'm going to be most over the field on, given that it's the game of the week. Like you said, I mean, Detroit has been an egregious NFL team, but they've been able to put up points on the board. It's like we saw last week was the perfect example. I think the Millie Maker winner featured multiple Detroit players because, sure, they lost that game, but they were in an overall great scoring environment. And they generally do have fairly predictable pieces. Marvin Jones has dominated the work with Kenny Golladay out, and I don't think he's technically been ruled out, but he wasn't practicing again on Wednesday, so I don't think he's going to be playing. So given that we have Marvin Jones as a very cheap number 1 receiver, so like 4,900, and he's coming in at low in the context of this slate being under 30% feels low. Like I think Marvin Jones at 4,900, he at 30% is probably one of the better receiver plays of the slate, given his price. Really, is that like how many number 1 receivers on the slate can you find at that price? I mean, Tampa Bay's number 2 and 3 receiver are going to be more expensive than him. So Marvin Jones, I'll have a ton of. I think you can even play DeAndre Swift in your Stafford lineups because, like, we know DeAndre Swift has a very solid receiving role. And if they go out and if they somehow put up 4 touchdowns, sure, it's not incredibly likely, but if they do that and they split them 3-1, you're likely seeing Stafford and DeAndre Swift make the optimal lineup. So I'm going to have a lot of Detroit ownership. I think maybe the more interesting question is, where do you run it back with? You're going to be running it back. But on the other side, it is much more ambiguous. I feel Marvin Jones is the locked number 1. TJ Hawkinson doesn't give up. Maybe we'll find a random Jesse James, maybe. I think that's their backup. Random Jesse James touchdown seems incredibly unlikely. Hawkinson has dominated the work as far as tight ends go. And Swift has generally in recent weeks pushed for that number 1 role since coming back. The other side is more exciting from a points perspective and 10 times more difficult to figure out.
Yeah, I think just trying to find him on my list there. Jesse James, I'll give away the projection on him. 1.57 fantasy point projection from Alex Baker. So, not expecting much there, but you never know. He grabs that 1 target for a touchdown. But you mentioned Swift in the passing game. I do like that call. Each of the last 4 games he's played, he's received 5 targets. So they definitely do look his way in the passing game. And I agree. If they put up a big game, put up a 3-4 touchdown game, he's got the upside. So definitely a guy I think wouldn't be shying away from including him in groups in Fantasy Cruncher or anything like that. As far as the run back, it does become an issue of which one of these guys are we going to take from Tampa. And, where are we going to find any kind of leverage with this offense, or where are we going to find a low-owned guy? They're all coming in around the same. They're all coming in around, the same pricing even. So it's difficult to really figure out which one of these guys I want to get to. You were talking mostly on DK pricing. The FanDuel pricing on them is interesting as well. You've got a big group of guys there, and you don't get a lot of relief with Marvin Jones on the FanDuel side. He's right in line. Chris Godwin, 7,200. Marvin's right behind him at 6,800. So there's some savings, but it's not nearly as significant as over on DK. So creates an interesting situation over on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think maybe my one lean as far as the Tampa Bay guys go is that since I believe it's week 9, we had Antonio Brown come back. Brown has a higher target share and a higher air yard share than Chris Godwin, but Antonio Brown is cheaper, but then you look at the ownership and we have Chris Godwin project. Like, I get it. Chris Godwin has a longer standing track record on this Tampa Bay team, as almost like last year, he basically was the number 1 receiver and he was performing decent early in the season. He was pushing Mike Evans to the fringes. But we're starting to get a growing sample size that despite, even if Antonio Brown ends up running less routes, playing less snaps, he just has an ability to draw targets, and those targets seem to be coming at the expense of Chris Godwin, because Mike Evans, I do believe, has the most targets and air yards since Antonio Brown joined the team. I would be saying, you can play Chris Godwin at lowered ownership if that were the case, but people don't seem to be adjusting as much as I think they should to this split where Antonio Brown, at least in terms of the volume metrics, is the number 2 receiver. So as far as leans go, it's going to be difficult to predict these guys, no doubt about it. But the volume is slightly pointing to the Chris Godwin direction, and ownership is just not adjusting.
Yeah, it seems like, I think it's just people buying into, or just, thinking narrative wise, okay, Godwin's the star, he's going to get the volume, and not actually looking at the numbers and saying, okay, Antonio Brown, problem child, just coming back. Like, well, he's been with the team for a few weeks now, and we're seeing him get the volume. You kind of have to follow where things are actually going. So it's a good habit to get into in DFS in general. Just get those narratives out of your head. It's not something to really think about, and pay attention to what the numbers are actually telling us. And in this case, just looking at week 15, Godwin was out targeted by Evans, Gronk, and Brown. They each got 7. He only got 5 targets. Lenny Fournette got 5 targets. So, I mean, the volume's reduced. And like you said, the ownership discount isn't coming. So, yeah, it might make sense to look to Brown. Anything for you with Gronk at the tight end position? Any desire to get to him as a tight end play? Do you think there's any advantage going to him over Hawkinson, or is it just kind of a distribution thing for you?
Yeah, I think he's fine. It's just with someone like Gronk, like you said, it's been unpredictable as to who it is. Sometimes he'll target Chris Godwin. Sometimes maybe he goes out and gets 1 target and doesn't. Well, I think he had a 1 target, or at least a 1 catch, 1 touchdown game a few weeks ago. So in my Tom Brady lineups, which I'll probably have a decent amount of, because I think this is the game that is going most underowned relative to the incredible upside of it, I'll probably have some Gronk. I'm not making like a strident point to get to him, though. Interestingly, I think over the past, 7 or 6 weeks, whenever Antonio Brown joined the team, he has like the second highest ADOT among the notable pass catchers, ruling out Scotty Miller and Tyler Johnson. So as far as tight ends go, he probably does have a decent amount of like splash play upside, given that like deep targets are generally where a lot of good upside plays come from. So maybe I'm talking myself into Gronk just a little bit more than I initially started off feeling about him.
Yeah, it's actually a good call. Just looking at it, he's trailing. He's 10.8 ADOT on the season, it looks like, which is just behind Evans is 11.8, and then you get Scotty Miller, but who's really playing Scotty Miller, and then you drop down to Antonio Brown is 9.5, Godwin 8.4. So yeah, he's getting those deep targets. So maybe it's another one where narrative wise people think, all right, tight end and Gronk maybe a little bit touchdown dependent, but not necessarily. And against the defense that definitely yields some passing yards. So definitely an interesting spot there. I think we can get to that. On the ground for Tampa, we mentioned Ronald Jones most likely not playing. What do you want to do with Lenny Fournette? I think he's going to probably draw some ownership. He was coming up like crazy for me in crunches. So I'm really curious what you think of Lenny Fournette, about his opportunity. He's got a good projection from Alex, so he was definitely popping for me.
I think Leonard Fournette is one of those players where, like, obviously I don't think many people this day and age really like Leonard Fournette as a player, but you said it's the opportunity and the projection. Like, of course, I think Leonard Fournette is some big, slow, bumbling running back, but I don't really care if he's going to go out and get the opportunities. He's going to get the goal line work. He was used as a pass catcher basically throughout the season until he got healthy scratched. And you said, like, we can easily see him come back and function as that pass catcher, as the goal line back, and is mostly between the tackles back again. So I think because his ownership is going to be, pretty, relatively high for a small slate, I would be focusing on maybe building some more unique lineups around a Leonard Fournette, given that I don't love him. He's fine, but I don't love him. I think maybe if, say, you were playing a different game, you were stacking a different game, running him with like a Danny Amendola or something arguably weird like that would be a really interesting approach to playing, chalky-ish Leonard Fournette.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I think we covered a lot of this game. Anything that we missed? Anybody that we want to bring up that we didn't talk about? One just oddball one, since I just saw his name that popped into my head just now. If you're running 150 lineups in the gigantic, $3 tournament or whatever it is on FanDuel DraftKings, the big milli makers, any thought toward the value in playing a Chase Daniel lineup?
I don't think so. I think I would be, because not only do you have to get you have to get a lot of things right. Me and Greg talked about this on I think it was on some random showdown slate. You have to get so many things right. Like, one, Stafford has to get injured. Obviously, if Chase Daniel ends up getting the start, sure, I'd consider it. But assuming Chase Daniel is just the backup, Stafford has to get injured. He has to get injured early enough that you actually get enough, just enough opportunities for Daniel. Daniel comes in the fourth quarter, even if he throws a touchdown, it will not matter. Someone will outscore him even on a points per dollar basis. So you have to get injured. You have to get injured at the right time. Then he has to come in and play well, and even play well adjusted for the fact that he has to beat out guys, at least on a points per dollar basis, guys like, Brady and Kyler Murray on this slate. I think we have good options. So I think you are parlaying so many unlikely outcomes that, although I'm sure it will be fairly unique, and that's something you probably need to strive for in the big tournaments, is just not getting duped. I don't think it's plus EV. I think it is such small odds of happening that even, it just doesn't account for the fact that that it's so small odds of happening. It's not worth it. There is certainly some potential upside. Obviously, we talked about after the Marcus Mariota thing. So obviously there is a theoretical upside to playing Chase Daniel. I don't think it's worth chasing to use that word.
Oh, let's see what he did there. Yeah, look, if Stafford trips over the 50-yard line at the coin toss and hurts himself and is out of the game to start, then maybe he catches a little upside. But I'm with you. Even showdown slate-wise, I don't get into the chasing backup QB, stories. Even when somebody's banged up, coming in like Stafford is, there's just too many things you need to go right, like you were saying. And there's just, even if the guy does get in the game, you almost never get it with enough time for him to rack up enough points to matter. So totally with you there. Anything else for this one before we jump out and head over to the next game?
I kind of like Danny Amendola, 4 targets last week, 7 targets, 5, 3, 10 targets before that. He has a modestly interesting role when Kenny Golladay is out. I mean, a lot of games over 50 and 60 yards. 2 weeks ago, 66. The week before that, 62. 2 weeks before that, 77. He has not scored yet this season. So, I mean, you're drawing. I don't say you're drawing dead. It seems like, of all players who get a certain amount of volume, given his volume, he would be less likely to score touchdowns. Probably just a usage thing. But I mean, he's getting enough volume that if he does post that 4 for 60 and does find the end zone, you have to imagine he's in the optimal lineup. So I'll probably be over the field on Danny Amendola because it doesn't take a lot to get there.
Like that call a lot, actually. And just looking at him projection wise, he is certainly not, at the top of the projection list. He's 13th by projection, but you're right. He's getting the volume. He is not expensive. He is not going to be very highly owned, just looking at the ownership numbers. So that's a good call for GPP. So I like that a lot. All right, moving on, guys. We've got a big promo. Everybody, I think, is aware that the NBA season is back. If you're not aware, there's a massive 13-game slate tonight. So, as you know, we've got the best content out there, and we're running a big promo. So, we're offering $1 off, $1 NBA access, not $1 off, $1 period, through December 29th for new members only. When you use promo code Caruso. This gives you access to NBA preseason DFS premium Slack, gives you everything we have to offer for the first week of the regular season, including our projections, our ownership projections, access to the boom bust tool, the expert Slack, our lineup builder, a whole lot of content for $1. if you guys get in here, you're going to see the value, and I would think that you're going to end up sticking with us going forward. So take advantage, get in before the 29th. You get a week for $1. I think you're really going to like what you see on these NBA projections and everything. So come join us, say hi to us in Slack. We're all hanging out. We love answering questions and chatting with people too. So come join up. Kyle, moving on, we've got San Francisco at Arizona in the afternoon. Arizona coming in as 5-point favorites, 48.5-point total was last I saw. 22.25 point implied total for San Fran, 26.25 for Arizona. A little bit of a tight game. Arizona, very, very good offense going up against a reasonably good San Francisco defense. The fifth in terms of yards per attempt to the rush, 3.9 yards per attempt rushing. Eighth, allowing 6.5 yards per attempt passing. So decent spot for a good offense going up against a decent defense. On the other side of things, Arizona 18th with a 4.4 yards per attempt to rush, but 6th against the pass, 6.3 yards per attempt. San Francisco very, very banged up on offense. So 50,000 foot view wise, any thoughts just coming into this one before we dig into injuries, player stuff?
Yeah, so this game is the one that I think will probably be most popular for one obvious reason. It features Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins. There aren't like a bevy of studs to play on this slate. So when you're looking at paying up for someone, you're probably landing on a lot of Murray and a lot of Hopkins. I believe Hopkins is our highest owned player on the slate. Murray is definitely our highest owned quarterback. I think if you are getting into this game, it's about how do you get unique. Like, I don't feel like if I'm playing a Stafford stack, I don't have to get anything weird. I'll play his number one receiver, Marvin Jones, and that's going to be one of the lowest owned stacks. Maybe it's not as low owned as a CJ Beathard stack, but it'll be one of the lower owned stacks on this slate. If you're playing Kyler Murray, well, you're playing Kyler Murray, you're playing DeAndre Hopkins, and then because you have spent so much money on those guys, you're probably playing the obvious cheap plays. So it's about how can you find a way to build a unique Kyler Murray lineup, and I do think there are ways to do that.
Yeah, and that gets into some interesting things about just lineup building and how it comes together when you follow the chalk on some of those decisions at who am I stacking, where's my quarterback coming from, who's my primary skill player, especially on a short slate like this with kind of a dearth of options. It really leads you down very specific paths and very specific constructions. And you're going to end up with some dupe lineups, particularly in those large field GPPs where there's just so many entries. People are covering every possibility across these games. If you make that decision, you have to get creative about how you're differentiating your lineup. But at the same time, we kind of hit on it with the question about Chase Daniel. You don't want to get stupid about it. You don't want to throw something in there that's just a total dart throw and 19 different things have to go completely right and you're threading the needle completely for it to happen. You want to find that happy medium. So any plays jumping out at you as we get into this game that might kind of fit that bill?
I think the backup or the not number one receivers on San Francisco are a little interesting. Like I think you're going to get skewed Kendrick Bourne ownership, at least relative to Richie James, who saw more targets than I believe it was like 7-4 last week because Bourne brought down a Hail Mary. I was watching that game and it was a meaningless Hail Mary too. The game was already over and Bourne secures a Hail Mary that put him at like 4 for 80 and a touchdown. I would prefer Richie James because our ownership right now has him way lower owned, like 7% or so lower owned. I think they're about equal plays, but if they're all things equal, I'll take the guy who's lower owned. I think really that's the way to get unique though, is because let's find Jordan Reed's ownership is not that bad. It's not very high at all. So I think it's hard to get unique with Kyler Murray specifically because he throws to one guy so much and almost no one else. You can throw in some Dan Arnold, sure. You can throw in Larry Fitzgerald, but I think it's like you said, it's about finding that medium of things that are more likely to happen than their ownership indicates. Essentially is just it's hard to gauge, but that's what you have to try and find is things that will just pay off better than the risk you take. I think the San Francisco side is probably where you find that happy medium.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. And then, San Francisco, as you mentioned, there's a lot of guys coming in. They're a little bit banged up. They're a lot banged up, actually. We've got Mullins out. He's going to need Tommy John surgery. Debo's still out. Mostert's going to be out now. Richie James was limited in practice. He was the guy you just mentioned as a potential play. So we got to keep an eye on him coming in. I saw that note before we jumped on. So, with Mostert out, with question marks in the passing game, could it be Jeff Wilson week? Is that something that is on your radar at all? And if so, how much of them do you want as relative to decent ownership in the field?
Yeah, so I'm looking at DraftKings ownership. I think his ownership is right in the same ballpark as someone like Leonard Fournette. I know that like San Francisco is the stereotypical running team, and then Tampa Bay is one of the pass heaviest teams. But what I'm looking for with my running backs is the ability to score touchdowns. I mean, obviously touchdowns are hard to predict, but we can use Vegas lines and figure out which team is projected to score more points. San Francisco, not projected to score a lot of points, unsurprisingly, with CJ Beathard under center. So I think there's some efficacy to fading someone like Jeff Wilson, just because, like, especially for most running backs, when they don't have a ton of pass catching equity, you're just banking on touchdowns. And honestly, Jeff Wilson could be a better running back than Leonard Fournette. Would not surprise me. But it's difficult when I don't think they're going to score many touchdowns. And I see that he's like reasonably priced at 6K and a third of the field is going to be on him. And this is our DraftKings. That's actually for FanDuel, but I think DraftKings is right there as well. Like,
yeah, right around the same.
Given those circumstances, if he doesn't find the end zone, I'm probably winning my Jeff Wilson fade. And given that they're not projected to score a ton of points, I don't think he's incredibly likely to find the end zone. So I think I'd probably rather look to the pass catchers who don't necessarily, especially the cheaper ones or someone like Jordan Reed, they don't need to find the end zone. If no tight end scores a touchdown in the slate, Jordan Reed could easily lead them with 6 for 60 or something.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. That makes a lot of sense, given that we only have a limited amount of guys to choose from at a position like tight end. You don't need that touchdown play. So, yeah, looking for that yardage makes a lot of sense there. And what you said about Wilson as well, every note that I read around the industry about him always mentions, and he is the guy who's going to burst the ball over the goal line when you get all the red zone touches. Sure, but if CJ Beathard's not getting them in the red zone and they're playing on the other, just back and forth in the neutral zone, there's not going to be much going on, not much opportunity for him there. So, yeah, I agree. It kind of makes some sense to get away from Jeff Wilson. And I think he's a guy that might get talked up because of that, just the touchdown upside being there in people's heads. So I think we could see that ownership actually increase, which would make me more inclined to get off of it. Just thinking in terms of, another guy who would need to break one really to score a touchdown, but would come at a massive ownership discount and a reasonable pricing discount would be Tevin Coleman on the ground in that offense. He's got the same issue as far as what that offense is going to be doing, but kind of a dynamic guy, catch the ball out of the backfield, maybe break one. Any love for him more as like 150 lineups in a massive GPP kind of a play?
Yeah, I think especially when you think about the largest tournaments, like if you're playing, whatever the like milli type tournament is, or even the $3.20 max or the $1.20 max, you're going to get a lot of duplicated lineups. Like you simply just can't run, even like my Stafford stacks, I still probably need to make one or two other unique plays. I think Tevin Coleman is fine as that kind of play if you have him in 1 of 20 lineups or 2 of 20 lineups, because no one is playing him. And like Shanahan is infamously famous. I think he's just infamous for never giving one single running back a ton of the work. It's possible. Is it likely? No. But is it possible that Tevin Coleman goes out and scores a touchdown? Yeah, sure. I think it's absolutely possible. And the ownership essentially says there is zero chance. I mean, it says there's like a 99.9% chance that doesn't happen. So in the large field tournaments, I'm fine with 1 or 2 shots on a Tevin Coleman. He falls into like the same tier as like a Dan Arnold type where, sure, anything can happen. And the field seems to think there is no potential for it to happen.
Yeah, and that's what I like the most by far about it is just not anybody else being on it or very limited amounts of people being on it. So, yeah, that's a play. And again, you mentioned it. Yeah, 1 or 2 of those lineups. You don't want to put him. You don't want to say, all right, Tevin Coleman's my weird random play and put him in 20 of 20 lineups. That's not how this works. So, got to be safe about that. Looking around on Arizona, you mentioned the passing game a little bit. We know that the ball is going to Hopkins quite a bit. Anybody else in that passing game? You touched on Larry Fitz. He was a bit banged up in practice as well. You touched on Dan Arnold. Is that basically the long and short of that passing game? And then, anything on the ground? And we've got Chase Edmonds kind of ties those 2 questions together. So what do you think in terms of the Arizona offense?
I think Christian Kirk at a low price, looking at DK price, 3,800, less than 15% ownership. Like obviously DeAndre Hopkins projects to vastly out target Christian Kirk, but Christian Kirk does like have a decently high ADOT in the context of this being mostly the horizontal air raid. So there's a chance he had the 2 catch 80 some yard multi-touchdown game in the middle of the season and no one was on him then. I think given that, 15% on the context of having 3 games to choose from is, close enough to no one being on him that if you're playing Kyler Murray, he does make a certain amount of sense. I'm not sure. I mean, you can do it. I'd probably be more inclined to play him specifically with Kyler Murray, because if he goes off, it's probably a big game. Like I like, not for sure, but if he goes off, I think his range of outcomes is sort of, quote, bimodal. It's a very bad game, or he breaks 1 to 2 long ones. That's probably very beneficial for Kyler Murray. So I think I'd probably be most likely to play him in Murray lineups. Other than that, this passing game is rough. It's really difficult to play Larry Fitzgerald. He's going to be unpopular, which is the argument you make for him. But I think his ownership is closer to efficient than someone like Kirk's is. Chase Edmonds, man, I hope he plays. I think he was either limited or out of practice today or yesterday. Yeah. I really hope he ends up playing, because we saw last week, I believe he out-carried Kenyon Drake. It was like they finally gave up. They split 11-10, but they finally gave up on Kenyon Drake as this bell cow, and we still have Drake at a higher price and higher ownership. We have a one game sample that says that might not be the case at all, that Chase Edmonds could end up being the lead back. If I think there is even a 20 to 30% chance that Chase Edmonds is the lead back, I'd be interested in him. Then you tell me people are still treating Kenyon Drake as the lead back. I think Chase Edmonds would be the ideal leverage play on this slate if he plays. And, obviously if he doesn't play, Kenyon Drake looks like a solid play in his own right. But if they both suit up, Chase Edmonds has the potential to get all the passing work out of the backfield and a majority of the rushing work out of the 2 running backs. I'd be playing a ton of him. I'd be an egregious amount of Chase Edmonds.
Yeah, same. I think that's one of the bigger inflection points on the slate, is whether or not he goes. Because I agree. I think that was kind of a sign last week. Him, despite being questionable coming in, out touching Drake, and just he's been targeted in the passing game all season long, averaging 4.5 targets, basically 4.4 targets, seen 5 targets each of the last 4 games. So he's a guy they look to out of the backfield. He's a guy I don't mind pairing even with Murray. And you touched on some of the other guys in the passing game. I would rather get to probably Chase Edmonds and Murray rather than a Larry Fitz and Murray. Yep. But I think I'd rather go Christian Kirk and Murray maybe to start out. And that would tend to be my answer too for when people ask about running Kyler Murray naked without anybody stacking. In a spot like this where there's not as many people on his secondary and tertiary options, and everybody's so focused on Hopkins, it kind of ties back to that thing we were talking about before, where it narrows your path to choose Murray and Hopkins right out of the gate for what you can do overall. So you immediately differentiate your lineup if you're saying, all right, let's go with Murray and Kirk. Let's go with Murray and Larry Fitz. Let's go with Murray and one of these other guys. You're immediately starting your path a little bit differently. So hopefully you're opening up a broader spectrum of different lineups that you can get to. So I think that makes a lot of sense for people looking at Murray and maybe thinking about Murray naked, maybe go to some of those different ones. With that in mind, though, on a short slate like this, would you run lineups with just Kyler Murray and none of his skill players?
I don't think so. I think given his price at $7,500, you are really mandating that he gets there through the air and the ground, frankly, or he really gets there through the air. And because of that, if he was, for whatever reason, if DraftKings messed up and priced him at, $5K, I would say he can throw 0 touchdowns and 50 yards and probably still rush for enough. His price mandates that, if you are paying up for Kyler Murray and you are correct that he's worth paying up for, you've probably pushed 250 yards and at least a passing touchdown. I think you probably need to capture that touchdown with someone. I do really like the idea of pairing him with Chase Edmonds, though, because as you said, back-to-back games of 5 targets. And he's gotten some work in the red zone as a pass catcher as well. I think in the first few weeks, he stole a receiving touchdown from Kenyon Drake. I think it's not the ideal pairing, but honestly, I agree with you. I think he is a better pairing than Larry Fitzgerald.
So, the big question, you mentioned it earlier, CJ Beathard going to be in for poor Mullins, who, like I mentioned, is out getting Tommy John surgery at this point. Not something you hear about a ton for quarterbacks, but that's going to be a tough one for him to come back from, I think. But any love for Beathard here? It looks like he's trending under 5% ownership on FanDuel. Don't have the DK ownership.
Around 5% as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. Are you going to get to him? Are you going to reserve him for only some of the bigger tournaments and the big 150 lineup slates and play small shares of them? What are you thinking about him?
I don't know yet. I actually think I might have a little bit of CJ Beathard as a way to attack the popularity of this game in a different way, especially if his ownership is that low, given that we have 6 quarterbacks to choose from. I actually think I might get to a little bit of CJ Beathard. He's cheap. He allows me to play. Like I could play a CJ Beathard. You can play the chalk by playing CJ Beathard, essentially. You can play CJ Beathard plus Brandon Ayuk plus DeAndre Hopkins, two of the most popular plays on the slate in the same game that everyone's going to have. If you're playing CJ Beathard, you've correlated yourself with Ayuk and Hopkins to an extent, but you've done it in a way that no one wants to go to. I think I will maybe have a little bit of CJ Beathard.
Yeah, this is, I haven't done much and crunching. I didn't force anything. I didn't put any of my usual tweaks or anything like that in there. So just looking where I got to him, it was around 3% on FanDuel, and this is with Alex's projections, 3% on DK. So he was coming up, that's across 300 lineups. So based on just a pure fantasy cruncher, he was coming up a little bit under the field. But based on everything that I would do in my process, I think that I would end up reasonably over the field on him. Not somebody, I'm not going to have 50% of my lineups being CJ Beathard stacks, but if he's going off around 5 or a little lower than 5, could I be at 10? Could I be a little higher than 10? Certainly. And I do think that's, like you said, it's a good way to attack this game. It's a good way to attack the slate, just being very different. And you don't need a ton from him at the price. He's got an okay projection from Alex. He's not like tragically projected where, he's got a 5-point fantasy point projection or anything. So I think when the top stacks come out for this, assuming that we see it, I think it's going to be one of those spots where, San Fran's probably going to be at the bottom of the list, but I think their probability of success might be a little bit higher than where we're seeing them on. So I think it's definitely a team that I'm going to pay a little bit of attention to from that regard, and maybe get into a little bit of building with them just to see how everything else comes together. And like you mentioned, you can play the chalk from this game, and then you can get into some of the chalk from the other games as well if you're starting out on that foot. So definitely at least an interesting way to build lineup for this slate. Anything else from this one?
It's like you said, they seem like a team that would come in as like a 9% top stack probability and a 5% ownership. Like there's small edges to be had there, and that's what I'm hunting for, is these small edges. That if on the one out of almost a little less than 10 times this game is played out and Beathard rushes one in and throws for one, or tops a 300-yard bonus even in garbage time, I benefit disproportionately. I think that's more likely. So outside of that, not a ton. I think we covered pretty much everything else in this game. We could throw in the defenses. The Cardinals defense probably going to be among the most popular. I don't know. 49ers, I think if they were a little lower owned, if they were in that 5% range, I'd be interested just as like the ultimate leverage play, but nah.
Makes sense. Yeah, I actually hadn't even been thinking about defense, but that's a good call. For a 3-game slate, I think I should probably have to think about it a little bit more than I have so far, of course. But typically for defense, for me, on the main slates, it's I take what I get in fantasy cruncher price wise.
Yes,
I'm always looking for and trying to push a little bit the better spots and the better D. But just taking a peek at what our ownership looks like. Definitely looks like people are focused on the Cards and the Bucks, the two kind of standout spot for the Cards and then standout D for the Bucks. The Dolphins could be interesting in that defense as well. Kind of a bend don't break defense there that we'll get into in a sec. So it makes sense. Anything else from this one to touch on before we move on?
I think we covered pretty much all the bases. I guess I could throw it back to you. I don't think you gave any stance on Dan Arnold. I kind of like him in the same way that I sort of like the Danny Amendola. He's not getting a ton of snaps, but he's had a decent amount of targets. He's at like 9.9 yards per target. He looks like a big playmaker that rarely ever gets the chance to make plays. I think in these giant tournaments, sure, he has a chance to not outscore someone like Darren Waller, but if Darren Waller goes out and doesn't score a touchdown and any other tight end does, that other tight end will be very close to outscoring him on a raw points basis, let alone a points per dollar basis.
For sure. And Arnold is one of those guys, like you said, we've seen, some flashes of it through the year. He's a guy that I've been getting to in my stacks with Murray a decent amount. So 5 targets last week, 4 the week before. He's a handful of targets a week kind of a guy with that upside. And like you said, if he gets into the end zone, whichever one of these tight ends gets into the end zone who's not named Waller, like you said, is going to be a difference maker. So another major inflection point. So both tight ends from this game I think are in play as far as Arnold and Jordan Reed from the other side, and neither one drawing very much ownership at all. So definitely we're going to be rolling those dice on finding that touchdown, but it's a good way to differentiate lineups and just start building differently. So makes a lot of sense, and a lot of sense for those big GPPs. And so moving on, guys, before we jump into the next game, Got another one coming for you at Awesemo NBA, tied into the NBA season. Of course, that's our NBA Twitter handle. We're looking to get to 10,000 followers on our NBA Twitter handle. So get over there. Twitter is crucial for playing NBA DFS. That's where all the news comes from. We've got our news guide on top of everything, but it's just absolutely crucial to be on Twitter. So give the Awesemo NBA handle a follow over there. Stay up to date with all the latest NBA DFS news and all of our NBA content. Guys are constantly sending out all the links to all the new articles as they pop up, all the new tools, anything we're featuring. Like this week, we've had Adam's Deep Dive, formerly premium content behind the paywall. On a 13-game slate like today, that is a ridiculous piece of content to have for free. Adam goes deeper than anybody in the industry when he does those. So that's free in front of the paywall right now. I would get on that. But things like that are going out constantly on @AwesemoNBA over on Twitter. So get over there, give it a follow, and help us out a little bit. Jumping into the next game, last game of the day, the evening affair. Miami at Las Vegas. We've got Miami coming in as a 3-point favorite. 48-point total, 25.5 point implied total for Miami, 22.5 implied total for Las Vegas. I mentioned Miami's coming in with a bit of a bend-don't-break defense, allowing 4.6 yards per rush attempt, 28th in the league, 7 yards per pass attempt, 24th in the league, but they've given up the fewest points in the NFL. On the other side of this one, Vegas, 4.6 yards per rush attempt, 7.2 yards per pass attempt, giving up the fourth most points in the NFL. 50,000-foot view on this one before we get into players and injuries and all that stuff. Where do you come down as far as what you like on this game sides-wise?
This game is fine. I don't know. I think it's interesting that we're going to get a ton of ownership on someone like Darren Waller, who obviously is the best tight end, but his team isn't projected to score a ton of points. Awesemo's projections don't have him as like this outstanding value. So I think that, honestly, I think this is one of the biggest decisions of the slate is what do you do with Darren Waller? We can talk about him more in a little bit, but I do think at a 10,000-foot view or whatever, you see this giant summit that is the peak of tight endmanship in Darren Waller. And it's, do you try and get onto that, or do you gamble and play someone else? I think that's like one of the biggest crux of the slate.
Is that tight endsmanship that you just threw in there? I like that.
Yeah, I was riffing something there, and I like that word. I think I've coined a good word.
Yeah, solid, definitely solid. EMAC was looking for some catchphrases earlier in the year, so I think we'll throw that one over to EMAC, see if it catches on. Just looking, at the tight end spot, Waller is going to be a huge point for the overall slate. And then on the other side of this one, we've got Gesicki, who is, I'm not going to say Waller's equal in terms of skill by any means, but certainly, kind of carving out a place as a good pass catching tight end, a guy with some offensive upside for DFS, drawing a little bit of ownership as well. Banged up coming into this one with a shoulder injury, missed last week. Kind of a question mark for this one. If he doesn't go, do you think even more of that ownership flocks over to Waller then? Do you think that's, or are people going to try and, get to maybe a Gronk or a Hawkinson? Where do you think that goes if Gesicki doesn't go? And do you like Gesicki if he does go?
Yeah, I do think it would be, it maybe be split to a little bit of someone like Gronk in a similar price range, I believe. But I do think a lot of it would just be people would continue to basically buy certainty with Darren Waller, because we can be certain as long as this game isn't like a 20-point blowout for the Raiders, who do run a lot when they have a lead. As long as that's not the case, Darren Waller will be the most targeted tight end on the slate. We can easily project that. I think people like buying into that certainty. So losing a certain asset in Mike Gesicki, who's sort of similarly, it's like him and Hawkinson, we can actually feel kind of confident that they'll be the second and third most targeted players, or tight ends to be specific. Losing an aspect of certainty on this slate, I think, would push people towards a ton of Darren Waller, which I'm already uncomfortable with his ownership. And if he does go, he's fine. I think he's good, not great. I think maybe the Gronk and Hawkinson would be my preferred place, but I would still end up having probably more Gesicki v. the field than Waller versus the field.
Makes sense. And yeah, that's just for me, a play like Waller is something that I just see it on paper, and I haven't dug in a ton to the specifics of what I'm going to do with my lineups, like I said before, but just on the surface level, one player position like that, it's just an easy spot to start getting different with that decision. So that's definitely one of my first inclinations with this slate is, all right, what do I want to do different rather than play Darren Waller? He's a fantastic player. He's one of the best tight ends in the league. best point projection on the slate, but like you mentioned, points per dollar wise, it's not that differentiated from what Hawkinson is doing, raw points rather in the projection, and then point per dollar, you're right there. So I think there are other ways to go with that position to a degree that, yeah, I'm probably going to be under the field on Waller. As we look at some of the injuries, we've got Gaskins, I think, definitely going to be out again. We've got Gesicki limited, we mentioned. Parker limited, Devontae Parker limited with a hamstring. Jakeem Grant limited with, I believe, also a hamstring injury. So passing game-wise, this Dolphins offense a little bit banged up for Tua. Any thoughts as far as what the impact is to that passing game and what you want to do with it? Does it kind of force you away from that? Or are you still going to try and find some spots with this offense?
I think it'll be interesting. So what this is like time-wise, our last game of the slate. I assume we did these in chronological order.
Yeah.
It will be really interesting to see if we got what we had last week, where Jakeem Grant looked questionable, more likely not to play. But the I don't know if it was overnight reports or just practice reports that indicated that both Gesicki and Parker were going to play, and all three of them get scratched. And I don't think we saw, especially in like small field contests or like small entry, because you've got typically like sharp players have gotten played out of those. Essentially, you can't play in those. In like a $1.20 max, like the play action last week, even though like good players can play in that, just high rolling players can play in that. Tony Pollard last week was like 9% owned. That's egregious. That's horrible. And I think if we end up seeing like a very surprising amount of injuries that like say we expect Gesicki and Parker to play, if both of them get ruled out again, Durham Smythe and I think Lyndon Bowden and say Grant ends up being in or something like that, all of those guys would come in probably under owned. I just think the field is so. They don't utilize late swap at all. People don't, like, no one utilizes late swap except like you, me, everyone at Awesemo, and the people who play DFS for a living or play it as part of their income. Anyone else does not take advantage of news that breaks after lock, even before lock. So I think that'd be the most interesting thing. If any news changes, I would almost instantly just go over the field on the guys that like benefits.
Yeah, and you hit right on the guys I was thinking of. Particularly Bowden was a guy that popped up a little bit for me last week in doing that. Like you said, when we got the news on Parker and on Gesicki and on Grant, Bowden started popping in there a little bit. So definitely was seeing some of that, and that's exactly where I would expect to go again this week if we do get that news. And it's something I'm kind of maybe hoping for. I think it could shake the slate up a little bit and at least make things more interesting here and give us a few more plays that maybe people aren't on. I think that's another spot where people will flock more towards safety than toward these questionable players or players that they haven't really heard of, down the depth chart type guys. I think people are just more inclined to go toward what they know, what they think is safe in that situation. On the ground, too, we've also got Salvon Ahmed as the projected lead back for Miami, with Gaskin going to miss. Not drawing a ton of ownership right now, at least on FanDuel. He's under 10%. Is that a running back you would consider playing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's the ownership play. Like, this is a game that I don't think is going to feature a ton of points. I don't think it's going to be an exciting cap to the end of the night. But when you look at the volume we can project for Salvon Ahmed, it's really impressive. He's clearly a lead back between the tackles, and also does have some potential to draw a few targets. I think it just makes a ton of sense at his price, which doesn't have him as some crazy, like, egregious play, and at his ownership, which is just, it's in the context of the slate, it's non-existent. So I'm just typically looking for spots where I think, I can buy potentially touchdowns with someone who just has a good role in that sense, or overall volume. For someone like Ahmed, I could get 20 carries out of a guy who's not expensive and is not going to be owned. I just want to find plays that are far better projected than their ownership indicates, and this is one of the more glaring ones of the slate. Like, maybe once we get news that Gaskin is like officially out or something, this changes, but it would have to come up a lot for me to not be interested in Ahmed.
Yeah, that made my eyes pop out when I saw that ownership on him. I was expecting that to be much higher because I was just thinking of it in terms of Gaskin definitely being out. So when I saw that, it's not like he's going up against a really tough run defense or anything either. So that is a really good spot, in my opinion. And he's right around the same. I just pulled up the DK. He's right around the same mark over on DK as well. So definitely one of my preferred running back plays on the slate. Definitely a guy I'll get to in large field tournaments, assuming the ownership holds, or like you said, doesn't go up to the 45% range. If he's coming in around like a 15, 16%, like a Chase Edmonds kind of a guy, those are two guys I really like. You pop both of those guys into your backfield, and then you're doing different things right there. And you can play some of the chalk at wideout. You can play some of the chalk at tight end. get a Kyler Murray into your quarterback spot, you're doing different things. So I really like the upside of a play like that. I think it makes a lot of sense.
It's like, what's the difference between Salvin Ahmed and Kenyon Drake? I think almost nothing. Like, they got to be very similar plays. Maybe a Drake plays on a slightly better offense or whatever. That's fine. Give him a slight advantage there. But I have to imagine, even if this ownership climbs, the discrepancy between the two is going to be far greater than I or you clearly would seem to believe it should be. So it's just like, if I can swap out a chalky Jeff Wilson for Salvin Ahmed, or Chase Edmonds, another great example, I'm very often going to be doing that.
Yeah. And then we talked about the passing game a little bit, but I just wanted to pull up the targets from last week. We saw Bowden last week got 7. Smythe got 5. Week before that, Bowden had 9. So, and that was with Kazicki and Parker on the field and Grant on the field. So Bowden's definitely a guy who could be involved in this offense a little bit more than what people seem to think, at least right now. Not drawing very much attention at all. So I'll be curious to see where they rank out in terms of our top stacks as well with this team. On the Vegas side of things, we've got Carr is banged up, limited with a groin, but I think he's going to play. Jacobs was a full practice. Renfro was limited in practice. Anything jumping out at you as far as the Raiders passing game outside of Darren Waller, who we kind of already covered?
Yeah, I think Nelson Aguilar's ownership at his price seems kind of low. I mean, he's clearly the number one receiver. It sounds ugly knowing what we know about Nelson Aguilar's history with the Eagles, but he has been nothing but like a very solid playmaker for this team. Outside of Darren Waller, he's clearly been the second pass catching option, and he's only 4,500, sort of the Marvin Jones thing. He's cheap, he's the number one receiver, and the ownership is not coming in. I mean, we have him below 20%. I think he is the perfect leverage play off of someone like Darren Waller. If he goes out and ends a drive with a long touchdown, that's like 2 to 3 catches that could have gone Waller's way that instead all went on one single catch to someone like Nelson Aguilar. He's been scoring touchdowns at a crazy clip this year. And normally, like, people were buying into the fact that he's a touchdown scorer. He was at 45% owned. I'd be like, oh, well, if he doesn't score a touchdown, you're fine fading him. That's a good spot. People aren't buying into any of his performances this year, despite having a ton of spiky upside. So I think just from a high level view, looking at the projection, the price, and the ownership, Nelson Aguilar seems to be like a very big mismatch, sort of like I talked about with Chase Edmonds. Just the potential seems to be far higher than the price or ownership indicate.
I like that call. He's a guy. I don't like the player. I am in that group of biased people. I'm a Giants fan. I see 2 Eagles games at least a year. Direct watching the whole game, and then what you saw him over the years, just red zone wise and everything. And yeah, guy who scares me putting him into my lineup, but he's getting the deep targets. And you mentioned that is exactly what you want to look for to go up and leverage against a guy like Waller, is a guy who can cut a drive in half. Now they're not getting the same amount of plays. So just in terms of the 2 extra targets, a handful of yards that now are off the board for Waller, not to mention the touchdown, of course. So that makes a lot of sense. I play most of my action on FanDuel, and he's a little bit more owned over on FanDuel, despite not really being cheaper or anything over there. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. But he's in like the 25% range on FanDuel. Not something that's going to make it that much different of a play, but something to consider, maybe for the folks out there when they decide to make this play. Anything else? Any of these other pass catchers over there? If Renfro goes, do you like getting to any of him? And then like a Zay Jones is kind of a dart throw, a guy like that.
You could play Zay Jones. I'm probably not playing Zay Jones. It's like how many lineups would you have to build to get to him? Maybe he does fit somewhere in that 150. He's like 148, 149. But nah, I'm probably not playing Zay Jones. Hunter Renfro, a little interesting. I mean, it was weird. They really didn't target anyone consistently last week outside of Nelson Aguilar and Darren Waller. And I mean, I guess that makes sense. Darren Waller draws a ton of targets, and Nelson Aguilar has also done that at a pretty surprising clip. So maybe you bet on that sort of bouncing back in the other direction where you don't see incredible target shares from one of those guys, and that puts you on someone like Renfro. I mean, what his ownership on DK is 8%. I'm checking on FanDuel. That seems efficient, though. I don't think he's got some incredible chance of scoring a touchdown or making a long play, but it's in the range of outcomes. I think ownership is efficient on him.
Yeah, 5-ish% on FanDuel, but yeah, not somebody who's really popping off the page for me. It's again, 3-game slate. It's a guy who will be part of the mix. Certainly will get pulled into some car stacks for me. So I'll be curious to see how much after I do my filtering process and everything I would actually get to him. But yeah, not one of my favorites on anything other than ownership there. Let's see, just looking around. We haven't really touched on Josh Jacobs. You mentioned other than they like to go to him when they get the lead. Is he somebody who's in play for you very much? Looks like one of the stronger projected running backs on the board in Alex's projections. Definitely is drawing some ownership and, has a fairly heavy price tag.
Yeah, so maybe people aren't getting on Jacobs simply because his team is an underdog, and it does make sense you wouldn't want to target Jacobs as an underdog, but we know NFL spreads are fallible. They're very accurate in the aggregate, but in an individual game, I don't know, the Jets could beat the Rams. So it would not be surprising to see the Raiders come out here and win this game, and in that case, it would probably negatively affect someone like Darren Waller and positively affect Josh Jacobs. So given that he's going to come in maybe a little bit lower owned, I'm looking at DK, let me see if I can pull up FanDuel. Actually, I think FanDuel also has him as lower owned, and it's maybe a bit of a coin flip is too much to not enough credit Darren Waller, but it's not far off from a coin flip that the game script helps one of them and hurts the other one. I'd probably lean, if I'm choosing one of these guys, to go with Jacobs over Waller in a majority of my lineups.
Cool. Sorry, as you were concluding that sentence, it sounded like the window next to me was about to explode. So I don't know what's going on out there. Got some construction crews out there. A couple minutes left in the show here, just to wrap up, guys. We've got a big giveaway going on. Check out the pinned tweet over on our Awesemo_.com over on Twitter. Enter our NBA giveaway to win a year of Awesemo Plus NBA. $400 value, gives you access to everything Awesemo Plus has to offer for NBA DFS. Just follow the instructions on the tweet. It's pretty easy. Predict the top DFS scorer on the slate. One random winner gets selected from the correct guessers. Good luck. And again, we've got free deep dive from Adam Ship My Money Sharer. So get on that 13-game slate. That's going to help you tremendously in making some decisions with this slate tonight. Kyle, before we jump off, top quarterback, top stack for you for this slate. Who you expect to get to the most as far as your builds?
I'll probably be getting to Stafford. I don't know about the most, but easily the most over the field. Like you look at what the field will have versus what I'll have. I will be many X the field on Stafford because he plays in the best game. He has played well and his offense has played fine. And I think it's quite obvious when you stack Stafford, there are like 2 or 3 options to stack him with. So if you correctly pin your money on Stafford, you've got like a 1 in 3 chance. Whereas at least like when you look at stacking Tom Brady, like you have a 1 in like 5 or 6 chance of actually finding the right guy. Not that I won't have Brady. I just know that I probably have to make more Brady lineups to find the right combinations. I don't need many Stafford stacks to find the right combination. So I will have my bases certainly covered on him.
I like it. I like it a lot. Yeah, definitely be getting there. And then, we talked about those wacky low on CJ Beathard. The more I think about it, the more I might get into that. Definitely not saying that's the top stack of the week, but just in terms of somewhere where I might be over the field on a stack, I think that could definitely be in play. So curious to see how it comes up as things shape up for me. Last couple of minutes here. Low owned Saturday slate breaker.
Let's go with Danny Amendola. I've already pinned my money on Stafford. I talked about the volume we've seen with Danny Amendola. If he can find that first touchdown of his season, if he finds that first touchdown, I'm confident he will be in the optimal lineup because he's not highly priced. He'll be a good stack with Stafford if that ends up being the correct play. And he's getting volume. It just hasn't converted to any crazy game. So I think Danny Amendola has a far greater chance of being that player that no one saw coming than people expect.
I like that call. That's a good one. And that's one I like that in particular because it's one that will melt the DFS community's brain because he hasn't scored all year. So it'll just be one of those, of course, no Danny Amendola, no cash. For me, I'm thinking maybe that Salvin Ahmed call. I haven't given it a ton of consideration, but I like where the ownership is at. If he can get the ball in the end zone once, twice, I think that could be a very big difference maker for us on this slate. So I like that one. And I think that's a good spot to get a little bit weird with your running back. And then, like I said, I kind of like the idea of putting him and Chase Edmonds into a lineup, and then you can get very chalky with some of the rest of the stuff that you do. So a couple differentiators there for me. I think that kind of wraps us up, guys. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, give us a thumbs up out there. Subscribe to the podcast on all your favorite podcast networks. Come subscribe for $1 for all our NBA content with the promo code Caruso. Join us in Slack. Say hi. Got a bunch of good people cranking out good content every day. I'm talking to you guys. Kyle, this was fun.